All right. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Rachel, if
I
not.
think I know you all, but I'm Rachel, and I'm going to be talking about empowerment. And I want to do this topic because I feel like it's kind of a buzzword, especially in interpreting programs, and we're always talking about empower the deaf people, but then they never really say like what we do to empower them, and it's always seemed kind of weird, a weird concept to me. So. First I want to just get some basic definitions so we are all on the same page. So this is from the book, So You Want to Be an Interpreter. From Alcorn, and they say it's a process of reclaiming one's own power in order to take charge of one's own life. And then this is from Webster, Merriam-Webster, and this is to promote the self-actualization or influence of. And then just a general, this one came up the most, this is like the general definition. To give power or authority to permit or enable. So this word often comes up in when I was like just Googling general empowerment, comes up a lot in the business world, like employee-employer relationships, and then with marginalized groups like women, minorities, and disabled people. And it was interesting because I found a lot of articles about women's empowerment, and there's a big like controversy right now because it's kind of turned into a marketing scheme where like Dove, Aerie, or whatever, they say, oh, you're just gonna be so empowered if you buy our product, and like Kim Kardashian's, posting topless pictures saying like, I'm so empowered by my body. So it's kind of seems like a marketing type thing when it relates to women, and I was starting to think like, what about interpreting? So sure enough, Sorensen, they got that in their little slogan, like, they definitely emphasize empowering deaf people, and even like a little thing I saw on Interpretex. So it does seem to be part of a marketing kind of thing. And then I thought, oh yeah, also RID conferences, and I thought too, like even us, when we're like making our resume, we might put that little word on there somewhere, marketing ourselves. So this is, when I hear the word empowerment, I just kind of, you think of this, like, so, and even the sign, like, so here I am, I'm this interpreter with all this power, and I have to give it to the deaf person, and it just seems really weird to me. And I found an interesting quote from a New York Times article, and this was back to the one about women, that said, a deep truth about the word empowerment is that it has never been defined by the people who actually need it. People who talk empowerment are, by definition, already there. So I thought that was, interesting and kind of related to how I felt about the whole thing. So I wanted to get the deaf perspective on it, so I talked to a lot of consultants and Rhonda and a couple other people. And the most common response I got when I was like, how can interpreters empower deaf people? They were like, what do you mean? Like I had to do a lot of expanding like what we mean by this concept, because it was definitely like foreign to them. And for all of us that have just graduated programs, it's not foreign at all. We talk about it a lot. And so it was kind of weird to me. So one deaf person just said, well, I mean, just by doing the job, I didn't have the information, and now I have the information, so by that, you've empowered me. And I think that's like pretty good point. Like, yeah, I mean, it's not all this extra stuff we have to do to get them up on their feet. It's more just giving them the information. Another deaf person said, making sure deaf people are always aware of their rights. Like, we talked about the provost rule, and I said, like, what if, I said, what if a teacher said they were going to show a movie with no captions? Would it be appropriate for the interpreter to be like, do you know about, like, the provost? Like, is that appropriate, or is that stepping over the line? And she's like, no, like, check in. If they say they know, then leave it at that. But if not, like, just tell them, you can't be graded on the stuff that they show. That kind of thing in her mind was empowerment. And then, like, always just refer to the deaf person. Like, all the time you get asked what the sign is for this or that. Just, why don't you ask them? Or even back to the example with the captions, like, all the time the teacher will ask us, ooh, this doesn't have any captions. Is that okay? And like, let's go ask them, because it's not about me, it's about, is it okay? Do they really want to watch the screen and watch me try to interpret at the same time? So that kind of just referring constantly, I mean, teachers all the time will ask us questions about the student, and just, I think that could be kind of a form of empowerment. And then just encouraging students to, like, a lot of times we get the question, like, just between us, and just encouraging them to ask the teacher, or even just being like, oh, that's a great question, let's go ask, or things like that. Oh, and then I have this interesting quote from a deaf professional that it was one of the comments on an article I read from Street Leverage, and he said, the idea of an interpreter seeking to empower the deaf consumer is an interesting dimension, especially for an ethical and liability standpoint. How does one determine a bright line between an interpreter and an advocate? And that's, like, I thought that was a really good point, because, like, where is the line, like, you know, with the things that we do in the name of empowerment, where do we draw the line? This is from Forbes. This article was called, like, 6 Ways to Empower Your Employees. But I thought that, like, we could use some of these, we could apply some of these to interpreting, and, like, in the moment feedback, like checking in with the consumers while we're going, making sure this is working, is that the sign you want me to use, that kind of thing. Transparency, you know, this is for management, but I think with us being like, hey, this is the first time I'm in this class, or just being very open, or like being like, oh, I made up, that was wrong, that was me, that wasn't them, you know, being very transparent. Not so much, it's more for, I mean, I don't know if any of you could think of examples of that, maybe just the encouraging, let's, oh, good question, that kind of thing. Respect their boundaries. I think that can, you know, sometimes be too over the top with, oh, do you have feedback for me? Can I improve? Can I this? Like, if they don't seem open to it, just leave it at that and don't, you know, harass them. Give them flexibility. And then this one, give them space. Like, this, I feel like in a lot of classes, like when there's group work or in like sports type classes, where there's not a lot of lecture going on. There's a lot of interaction with the hearing and deaf students, and like I've realized, like, I'm gonna sit back and like they know how to communicate. If they want me to come interpret, I'll interpret, but like that, like, oh, I'm here, like following them around, that kind of thing I've applied to this. Like I've worked with one person it was funny because at first I took offense to it, but they were, you know, it was a really low-key thing, and when they would talk to the hearing person that was like their colleague, they would write back and forth, and I was like, oh, you must be talking about me, or
Yep.
why am I here, you know, I'm an interpreter, well, let me interpret for you, but like, no, let them do their thing and build that bond and, you know, step back a little bit. I think stepping back can actually be empowering. So then I've got some interpreter perspectives just from asking you from a couple articles I read. I read an article by Dave Coyne on Street Leverage, and then there's also, I know probably a lot of you are familiar with the Deaf Disempowerment article by Tree. So Dave Coyne's main point was that we empower by checking in with the participants more, inquiring about what we should do next, and ensuring that no further disempowerment occurs. He also talked about cultural mediation, and he brought up some interesting examples. Like he gave a scenario where, you know, say you're working with a deaf professional and they're typing away on their computer and you're sitting over here and a hearing person comes in to talk to them. You have 3 options. You can just start interpreting, which, you know, obviously they're not even looking at you, they don't even know the hearing person's in there, but you could do that. Or you could go tap them on the shoulder, or, you know, do the little wave thing. Or you could say to the hearing person, tap them on the shoulder, and that'll get their attention, and then I'll interpret for you. And I liked that, because like we never think about the hearing person, like kind of what we can do to empower them. And then, you know, at the same time teaching them a little bit about the culture, you know, that cultural mediation. And then just like another example, like I was in a class and the interpreter was voicing and the deaf student signed something about Gallaudet, and real quick, just the interpreter just said, oh, that's a school, real quick little, and then got on with it. And I thought, like, that's really cool, because it's not always, like, you can do things to empower the hearing people too, so then maybe they could pause that deaf person and be like, oh, tell me more about that, or whatever. So there was another example too that we discussed in colloquium, and it's kind of sticky, but it like related to hearing cultural norms. Like if you're working in VRS and you're interpreting, and it's just clearly a scam, and you know you heard the accent, and they're like some prince from Persia, and it's very obvious. Now, is it appropriate to say, hey, you know, in my opinion, heard many calls like this before. My opinion, this is a scam. Like, you know, is that cultural mediation? Or is that crossing the line? But those were some scenarios that Dave Point brought up. And then Trudy Suggs, she talks about disempowerment, what not to do. But a big thing she emphasizes is just like an error, that in that sense you are empowered. And just a lot of the people that I talked to said things like encouraging participation. Just like I've said again, like let's go ask. That's a good question. Or let's, you know, I remember when I was a student interpreter, I was in this ongoing class, and one day we had a sub, and he came in, and anytime the teacher would ask the class like a general question, he was really good about the way it was just one student in the class. He would like direct it right to him, and like the way he did it was like, I know you know. Like he just like assumed that he had all the answers, and like it was very like empowering. Like, and I noticed that day that the student like definitely participated a lot more in class. He got to, because a lot of times like when it's a question to the class, they might not even have a chance to answer before a hearing person's blurted it out. So I just like thought that was cool to see that just total like difference in the student's behavior by the little subtle things that the interpreter did, just by like, I know you know this, and that kind of thing. So that was cool. And then just general ways of empowering, supporting that business, becoming a member of the NAD. And then here's more about disempowerment, and I think that we could be guilty of these things and not even in the moment think that it's disempowering. But like Trudy gives a powerful example of like when she was young, she signs really fast. She was deaf, and the interpreter would always be like, "Can you slow down? You need to slow down. I can't understand you." Or the interpreter got so frustrated that they just started voicing gibberish because they couldn't understand her. And even I think just that phrase, like, "I need to slow down," like that's kind of disempowering. Like that's their language. She said, "Oh, no deaf person has ever told me I need to slow down." So instead of that, maybe you could put it on yourself and say, I am not getting you, you know, it's not you being too fast, this is me. And even I saw a really interesting little, I don't know if it was on ASL Vet or where it was, a little blurb about regional dialect. Did any of you guys see that?
I did.
Yeah, and the guy's whole point was like, interpreters need to stop that, oh, it's just, it must be regional, oh, I don't know what that is. He's like, I never have a problem with deaf people understanding me, but they blame their lack of fluency on my regional signs. So just like watching when we say those things and taking more ownership, I think is empowering in a sense. And then, you know, she has a story about like when she's in the doctor's office, and there's, I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with this, but the interpreter ends up apologizing to the secretary for the deaf person, just simply saying, or no, the secretary is apologizing to the interpreter, and she's like, oh, it's okay. But like, this isn't your appointment, don't tell her it's okay, this isn't about you. So that kind of thing. And then other ways of disempowering, in her opinion, like if we take jobs from deaf people by becoming an ASL teacher, or taking roles of deaf people in a play or in a commercial or anything like that. So subtle things that we might not even be aware are disempowering, but they are. So that's pretty much it. This is just some like discussion questions. I know we don't really have time. But I still, you know, is it our role to empower, or is it, you know, I guess in the sense that the little things that we can do to encourage autonomy and things like that, I think that's how we should continue to do, but I think we need to stop focusing so much on empower, and like, it just, you know, that word itself just, you know, gives us kind of a sense of like power dynamics that I don't like. And then this too, like, do we even have power to give? Like, as an interpreter, we're really pretty powerless in most situations. Like, we're you know, we're not the teacher, we're not the person getting the grade, we're just passing it on. So like, do we even have power to give? And I think the only power we really have is that we have the information, but, yeah. So.
Well, you're also a hearing person.
Right,
And so as I'm a
exactly.
deaf
So
person and I'm in a
automatically-
classroom, I see two hearing people. One who's my instructor and another person maybe who, from the hearing point of view, doesn't have a lot of power, but you're still a hearing person. And so we do have the power, and we just need to emphasize that, you know, maybe not verbally, but through our behaviors, like all of the examples that you use, we're fine, you know, to show that we're not taking control of things and doing things for the deaf person, but we're actually including the deaf person. And it's interesting, your comment about how you weren't comfortable with the empowerment discussions and your ITP. And that could be a residual thing for, that's the way it's always been done, because the younger generation, I think, is more appreciative of diversity. And if you talk to people who have been here for many years, I almost look to my left, they'll talk about how the way NTID was, and they weren't here when NTID was built, but they were here, they've been here longer than me, and NTID has really evolved over that time. And so deaf people are more accepted, they're not looked at as peers, not necessarily, I'm not saying yes or no, but it's just a different time. And so that could be a residual thing, and I still think it's worth mentioning in a program, but maybe it wasn't expanded and unpacked enough. Yeah.
I know. I just want to add too, that this is really good. Good job. All of you. In our role to empower, I think for me, it's an easier pill to swallow to just flip it and say, oh, how do I not disempower somebody? How do I not take them down?
Whoops.
Because I have that trouble with the, ooh, look what I can give you.
Do you know?
Yeah, you know harm.
Yeah.
Taylor.
I thought that a really good exercise in empowerment for me was interpreting when they were expressing singing and learning what all the boundaries are and just feeling that out and figuring out when they want to do their own thing and when they need singing, building that relationship and where I stand with that. So that's why I learned a lot of this stuff. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent job, everybody.
There was a whole room clapping for you, I just went out the door.
Thanks, Megan. I don't think I did it. I tried, but I don't know how.
Thank you.